it's just Martine, and it's time for my April reading stats. I'm filming in a different location than usual, so a couple things to note. If you hear cars pass by, no you don't, and if you see little ears, it's because Ernie is with me, because he hates not being on somebody's lap. But without further ado, let's talk about what I read in April. In April, I read a total of 30 books, so a book a day. This was kind of on purpose, as I had this wild idea at the beginning of April that maybe it would be cool if I finished a book every day, but I didn't want to commit to doing that as a video concept. So even though I succeeded, no one will really know. There's no proof, really, aside from me telling you that I did that. And those 30 books totaled 9,570 pages, which means that my average pages read per day was about 319. In actuality, it was 302 because some of those pages I had read in March, but pretty close. I also spent quite a lot of time reading. I spent 103.447 hours reading in the month of April, which means that each day I averaged 3.45 hours, so almost 3.5 hours of reading, which is incredible. I read with my eyeballs every single day, 30 out of 30 days, 100%. So that was physical and ebooks. And then, unlike last month, which you should check out my stats here, I actually went crazy with the audiobooks and read them for 28 out of 30 days. And that's a whopping 93.3%, which is also coincidentally 93.3% higher than my audiobook days read last month. Now it's time to look at some fun graphs. Let's start by talking about genre. Per usual, we've got a pretty wide spread here with a tie for first place between contemporary and fantasy. Kind of a weird combo, but that's okay. Dystopian, sci-fi, and horror were the three other largest categories. I act as if contemporary and fantasy being in the lead is weird, but in actuality, if you look at my numbers for the whole year so far, those two are my top read genres of the year. So do with that what you will. Technically, at this point, fantasy is winning for my top genre of the year by 3 books in total. So that's terrifying because fantasy is not my favorite genre. Why am I reading so much of it? Regardless, let's look at fiction versus nonfiction. 86.7% of the books that I read in March were fiction. This meant that 13% of my reads for the month were nonfiction. Not too shabby. Switching over to book size, I can't actually tell you the shortest book that I read. It's for a secret project, but it was 73 pages in length, so do with that information what you will. And my longest book for March was actually the shortest long book I think I've had all year, because it was Beautiful Darkness? No, it was Beautiful Chaos at 516 pages, whereas in other months my long books have been like 700, 800 pages. Nah, we kept it simple this month. Nothing over 516. And my average pages per book was 319, so a nice regular sized book, I would say. That said, most of the books that I read were medium sized. For me, medium counts as anywhere between 300 and 500 pages. So technically 300 to 499 pages. We still had a good number of small books, about 24% of my graph. So the year of small books is continuing to go as planned. We had 2 large books, that's books between 500 and 700 pages. I'm pretty sure those are both Castor Chronicles books. And we had no chunky books this month, which is totally fine. For star ratings, it was a pretty typical month for me, with most of the books falling between a 3.5 and a 4 star. In total, between 3.5 and 4 stars, that makes up a little over 60% of the graph. I did have 2 5-star reads, so that's not nothing, unlike January. But I also had some pretty low rated reads. For instance, I had a 2-star read, and I don't think I had that last month, so my average rating reflects this fact. I think last month it was 3.9, but in March it was 3.5, so it went down a bit. For series versus standalone, most of the books I read were standalone books, about 56%. And fun fact, a lot of the books I read for series were like the first books in series that I will then never continue. Love that for me. Interestingly enough though, most of the authors were authors I've read from before. I feel like typically new to me authors are the ones popping off, but in this case, I read more authors I'd read from before. Per usual, most of the books I read were traditionally published, but a nice chunk of them were independently published. Although, try as I might, I'm still never sure that this number is correct. Most of my reads were backlist books. Backlist in this case is anything from 2022 and before. About 16% of my reads were from last year, and the remaining 16% were releases from 2024. About half the books I read were adult books. Young adult books came in clutch in the month of April. I read quite a few young adult books. A little over the third of my reads this month were young adult books. And my number of children's books went down because we finished up the Magic Tree House read-along, although in July, that number will increase once again. As is typical for me, a good chunk of the books that I read in the month of April were ebooks, a little less than 50%. But as you can see, I did read quite a few audiobooks, with 36% of my books being audiobooks, which is significantly different than the 0 audiobooks I listened to the month previously. There was one book that I read, half of it as an ebook, half as an audiobook, so that's that mixture category. I acquired most of my books through the Libby app, 76.7%, which is so many library books. I also borrowed a couple of books from friends or professors. I got one physical library book in. I read a NetGalley book and got my ratio back up to 100%, and I only read one owned book, which is a crying shame. That's enough graphs. Let's talk about money. I acquired 8 books, but technically I didn't pay for any of them. A couple of them I got with store credit from a used bookstore that I had, and some of them I got with a gift card. So I technically spent $0 on books. The library did save me a ton of money though, specifically $387.77, which is wild. And this brings my library savings for the whole year up to $1,492 and some change. As for where I'm sitting on my goals, my Goodreads goal was 52 books. So far, I've read 128 books, so I'm at 246% of my goal, which I just love saying every month. That's why I keep it. It's not meant as a brag. It's meant as something silly. I'm trying to read at least 24 books that I had owned before 2024 this year. So far, I'm at 14 out of those 24. This is 58% of my goal. I'm also trying to read 24 owned ebooks this year, and I'm up to 8. Hooray. So I'm officially at 33% of that goal. And with that, we've come to the end of my April wrap up. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a big thumbs up and comment a dog emoji down below to say hi to Ernie. And subscribe for more bookish and college lifestyle content. And until next time, bye humans, bye!